Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of the Guest List podcast. I'm your host, Steve Guest, and I'm really excited and energized for today's guest, somebody that I've known for a number of years now. And I can't wait to get chatting to this individual. For those of you who haven't listened to any episodes of the Guest List podcast before, this podcast was born out of really the successes of my first published book, Top Biller, The Life of a Recruiter. And that book created a platform where I was growing an active, engaged network. I was mixing in circles with individuals that had far more value, intelligence, and better stories and content than I did. So I thought, what better platform than to create a podcast and get all of these people on to share their journeys and their values. So today's guest is no exception to that at all. I'm going to dive straight into their bio, and we'll chat through in terms of some of the details. So today's guest has been involved in around 500 property deals in the past decade or so, most of which he has held on to and built a substantial residential portfolio with some commercial property also thrown in. He has joint venture experience that runs into 8 figures worth of deals and has bought and sold limited companies with property assets in and also trading businesses. Co-owns multiple investment companies and asset management companies, letting agencies as part of the business portfolio. Today's guest was Warwick Business School's top MBA Dean's List prize winner, 2012-2013, full-time cohort, and has delivered exceptional returns in a low-yield world with high risk management and at the heart of all of his ventures. His first degree was in philosophy, politics and economics at Oxford, where he also captained the college first 15 to 8 wins in 8 matches and saw St Hugh's College promoted to the first division for the first time in their history. A diverse business background with a broad range of experience, specialises in devising strategies that can triumph in any business environment. He has significant team leadership experience across business and non-profit consultancy projects, and particularly enjoys solving business challenges as a consultant. I want to offer a huge warm welcome to Mr. Adam Lawrence.
Thanks, Steve. That's a hell of an intro, isn't it? I think I can only disappoint from here, so let's see what happens.
To be fair, I was feeling as if I was almost next to that tongue-twisting sentence that wasn't going to come out properly. I did have a couple of stumbles with that, but I'm so pleased you've joined me today.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
I'm trying to think back. I reckon we first perhaps started to talk. It was a LinkedIn message, wasn't it? And it was probably maybe 4 years ago, 3 years ago.
Oh, I think it's more than that, Steve. To be honest, you'd have to go back and look. But I bet it's. In fact, I know that it's more than that because I remember the building where you first came to have a coffee with me, and we left that building in 2016. So it's definitely more than 5 years ago.
Obviously been enjoying myself too much. Okay, so just for the listeners' purposes. So I reached out to Adam 5+ years ago. I was looking at getting into property, and I had sent out a couple of messages, to be fair, perhaps before I'd messaged you. And I remember one response I got back, the person was willing to spend some time with me. I think they were looking at charging me £500 an hour, plus the coffee I was willing to buy them for their time, which at that point, I'll probably have a different opinion now, but at that point, I thought that was too expensive, and I certainly didn't have £500 to spend on property education for somebody that had pretty much zero understanding. I sent Adam a message on LinkedIn and said, could you spare me a little bit of time for me to come over and just have a chat with you? Which you duly did. I think I spent probably a good hour, maybe 2, sat having a coffee. You told me the ins and outs, and you put an offer on the table. Can you remember what the offer was?
Oh, blimey, no. I've been to sleep since then, Steve. Come on.
Well, the offer was, because I said, would you be able to help me? And your offer was, okay, here's the deal. I need to go and see my properties, and they're dotted in and around a bit of the East Midlands, a bit of the Midlands. I think the furthest we went north was Doncaster.
That's right. Yeah.
And you said, you take me around my properties and you can spend the day with me and quiz me all you like, and I can show you the the wins, the losses, the problems, the mistakes, the ones that went really well, the ones that didn't go particularly well. And you talk me through each of the properties and what happened, where and when. not 24 hours, a day's worth of education for the cost of a pub lunch and a bit of petrol is easily one of the best property investments I've made.
What a bargain, eh? What a
Exactly.
bargain.
But genuinely, from the heart, I am eternally grateful, because it's rare to have people that are willing to go to such lengths to send or spend time with someone that you don't know. You didn't know me, really, other than a coffee and a quick chat. But you started me on a path that has helped me ever since.
That is really, I really appreciate you saying that, Stephen. I think it's important, isn't it? You know, I think I look at things as you pay it forward a bit, but also I was paying it back from other people that I'd met. I started on the property networking circuit in about 2011, and I met a handful of really good people who gave me a lot of their time and expertise. And I just thought, you know, it's the way forward. Reach down and help people up, and that's one of the reasons why we went ahead to do what we did in the property networking sphere ourselves. So,
yeah,
you know, thank you for saying that.
Oh, an absolute pleasure. The thanks all mine. And I think since that moment, we've had a number of lunch meetings. We've spent time together where we've discussed properties. I've attended your really successful networking groups, Partners in Property, which has an amazing, credible group of people. And it does set you apart, I believe, from other networking meetings by just the caliber of speakers and people. That's not a plug, by the way. I'm just saying that as a genuine comment. And as I say, I'm grateful because it gave me, I suppose, the no BS type stuff. And there's a lot of it in the property field, isn't there?
Sure.
I mean, there is.
I mean, I couldn't have. It feels like I've paid you to say that, what you just said, because that's exactly, joking aside, that's exactly what Partners in Property has been set up to be. You know, no BS. A property network that is really a property network, not masquerading as something else while it tries to sell you expensive courses or whatever. You know, and again, I'd got so much from private networking that didn't have a brand, didn't have a face, didn't have anything to it, and looking at the people who were going along, who were really quality operators, again, that I learned lots from. So we're going back to sort of around a little bit before the time when we first met. I got so much out of these interactions, and I probably still do business with half a dozen or so of those people that I met in these sort of cloak and dagger environments, I suppose, if you like. And it just made me really a bit sad that there wasn't something like that was out there in the open for people to try and experience. And that network that I'm talking about, I got invited. It's a bit like the Masons or something. I don't know how I got invited in. I didn't have to wring any chickens' necks or anything like that. But one day I was invited to this meeting in Birmingham and thought, well, I'll go along, see what it's like. And there was some really great people in the room, but that sort of ran its course organically over the course of about 12 to 18 months. And then there weren't new people coming in. And, you know, these things, probably the hardest thing we have to do is try and get the right amount of new people through the door, so that we want the existing members to further their relationships with people. But if you don't have that sort of new blood, it's like fresh air, you know. And people think sometimes, oh, well, I'm not very experienced or whatever, but actually that's the best kind of people, because they haven't got that tunnel vision already that some people get, which is kind of forced down your throat a little bit by some of the property educators, you know. So, you know, we try and find that balance between, you know, new to property. Doesn't mean you're new to business. We get people who are new to property who just sold a business and are, you know, in their 60s or whatever, but they're coming to learn about property. You know, all the way through to people who've developed hundreds of units or acquired hundreds of units, sold them, held them, whatever. So a real spread, and it makes for a rich discussion, because, you know, people come in. We've had someone join recently who's you know, experienced in his field, which is oil and gas, and he goes about solving problems in a slightly different way. And so it's interesting to hear the way he goes, the questions that he will ask about anything from sort of short leases through to tenancy issues, through to is it better to have HMOs or serviced accommodation, all that sort of thing. And it's just watching out. I think I learn more by watching how people think, and I really enjoy that as well because it challenges me, and that's ultimately what I go there and spend my time doing. I want to be challenged. I want to continue improving myself, and I want to keep working through new ideas. And of course, with the changing environment that we've all had over the last couple of years, you know, it's been healthy, and it's I think one of the things that's helped me work through the choppy seas, if you like.
We need the challenges, don't we? Whether it's individuals that challenge us and are there for constructive debate. We don't want people to kind of pander to us all the time and say, well, you're doing so well, or you're successful, all that. You want people that saying, well, why aren't you doing it like this? Or have you thought about doing it this way? Why are you going down that direction?
That's it. I love to. It's great to sit and hear you go through my wonderful achievements in various degrees and stuff. But I honestly hear that and I think it sounds like somebody else because that's not the first thing I think of when I wake up in the morning. You know, and it's not what gets me out of bed. What gets me out of bed is furthering what I've done, not. Yeah. Although it's nice to be regaled about your past glories sometimes, and it brought back a few happy memories there for a few seconds for sure. Well, it's what more I'll do from here that really motivates me, you know.
I think in terms of when we first met. Now, obviously with the likes of social media and various things that go out there, you get to follow and stay in touch with people, even if you're not talking on a daily or weekly basis. And your growth since we first met has been pretty huge.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd love to remember how many units I had when we first went out, but it wasn't loads. Well, the property you're referring to in Doncaster, it's just outside Doncaster actually. It was a block of 10 flats with 2 commercial units underneath. But that at the time when we went out was probably more than a quarter of the units that I had in the portfolio. You know, it was a really big purchase quite early on. I think I bought it with a business partner back in 2014. I think
did you have hairdressers underneath as well?
It had a hairdressers and a beauty salon as well. I was not even educated enough to really understand the difference between the two of them, to be honest. But they get on very well, and they actually share clientele. The beauty salon's vacated since then to be replaced by another beauty salon. So, hey ho. And so they managed to survive through COVID, which is great. And actually, when you think about it, it's an interesting point because 10 years ago, these covenants were kind of people turn their nose up at them, really, a bit like cafes and things like that. Whereas now, all that stuff which is in the experience economy is actually the best sort of stuff you can have on a high street because you can't get a haircut on Amazon, ultimately.
Yeah, you can't get a virtual haircut, can you? Well, I suppose you can probably. But...
And there's more, just like ourselves, bearded gentlemen. You know, there's more beards around. There's more everything else. Yeah. This is more the male side of the grooming industry has shot through the roof in the last sort of decade. So I like I think those shops have got longevity. You know, the tenants do okay. It's a lifestyle business for them to an extent, but they do okay. You know, so it's good to see.
And talk me through some of the changes. So I know within that time period as well, I think you bought an estate agent, didn't you?
That's right. I've bought into a few estate and letting agencies, and I've also sold out of one of those already as well. So, been through a few company acquisitions and disposals. Yeah.
And I mean, from the outside looking in, I've dabbled in property. I couldn't sit here and say that I'm an avid property investor. I've had a good few years where I bought a few properties, and it was always bought in line with a potential kind of exit in years to come. I've got a bit of a pension plan. It's there for the kids when they grow up, and they've got a legacy to a certain degree. And the aim is to go back to it. I've kind of fallen out of it the last couple of years with everything else that's going on. But for perhaps some of the listeners that are tuning in and want to learn a little bit more about property, but perhaps they're a little bit nervous about how do you go about buying a second property or an investment property or that first buy-to-let or HMO, whatever it might be, because there's so much information out there, that some of it good, some of it not so good. How do you take that first step? How do you manage the risk and the...
It's a great question, because I think in many ways I want to say it's 100% mindset, but it isn't 100% mindset. But your mindset does need to be in the right place, because I've certainly met lots of people who, educated themselves quite extensively, spent many, you've got a choice really. I think you either spend hundreds or thousands of hours, or you spend hundreds or thousands, or sometimes tens of thousands of pounds to an extent. And then some people do a bit of both. But a lot of people, I think, are like me, and they prefer to sort of learn by doing to a large extent. So I think I would start from if we look at the mindset side, I've seen people spend all that money and then not do anything with it, and not even go and take that first step. And I think sometimes you underestimate how big that first step is.
Yeah, it's huge.
It's like a Neil Armstrong moment. I mean, you've done it. So, and people also say to me on the flip side, they say, how many have you done? So many hundreds of deals and things. And I say, well, to be honest, the important thing for you is I started with one, right? And after one, there was two, and then there was three or four. And that's ultimately, it doesn't have to be an arithmetic progression. Sometimes when it's four, then next year it might be eight if you throw yourself into it, and that's how you. It's the same as if you ever, I don't know if you've ever seen that graph of Warren Buffett's net worth. He's always done very well. It's really a pretty flat line and then it suddenly.
I think it was like 60 odd, wasn't he? And then it suddenly just flew.
He's right. I think he was close to 70 years. In his 60s, certainly, it just absolutely accelerates incredibly. And it's a similar thing within probably anything that you do. And that's why people say, quite often people give up when they've climbed the hill and they're nearly there and they slip back and they give up. And I think there's a bit of truth in that, in everything. But I think for people listening who want to sort of get started, there's a ton of good stuff on YouTube. Yeah. There's also a ton of bad stuff. I'm not obviously going to name people. And of course, it's subjective as well. I like listening to podcasts about the economy and hedge fund management and things like that, because I'm genuinely interested in it. A lot of people would think, blimey, I'd rather put a gun to my head than listen to all of that. But I think if you ask what the agenda is of the people who are providing you with the information, there's some of the best free content is not provided by some of the people who will protect your wealth in the best way, unfortunately. Yeah. So I think spend as much time as you can on things. I think YouTube's the greatest educational resource this planet has ever seen. Yeah. I think, but also, just like anything, it's a bit like if you read the papers, you have to read across the board. You've got to go from the Guardian to the Telegraph and a few bits in between, even if you don't identify really with either of those polar opposites, really, because you've got to get something across the spectrum. So I think choosing sort of 3, 4, 5 places to try and get your information from, YouTube algorithm's helpful because it points you in directions of things. Don't think that one person or one organization is the holy grail, because they're absolutely not. And you've also got to translate it into what matters to you. There'll be people listening to this who are not even in the UK, who might or might not be interested in UK property or property wherever they're listening in from. So there's different legal structures. There's all those other things to consider. And I think just have an open mind with what you look into. There's a big hamster wheel that sort of exists in the property world of property's the way to make £1 million overnight, which it probably is if you start with 2 million, and then so there's buy to let, and that's what you can do with simple buy to let. And then there's HMOs, and then there's serviced accommodation, and then actually, what about Forex, and what about crypto, and what about Amazon e-commerce? And the reality is all of those things are legitimate ways to make money if you've got the right sort of skill set and you apply yourself in the right way and you educate yourself to an extent. Yeah. But you'll never do one of them if you try and do 7 of them at the same time. So, I've already mentioned Buffett once, and I love to go on about him, but he talks a lot about focus rather than diversification for the sake of it. And I think people have got to focus. One of the questions we always ask people if they're going to get serious about property is how many hours a week are they going to put into it? Because I've talked with people before who've got, I look at it as this way: if you've got time and then you've got money, and those two things, that you don't need both of those things necessarily at the same time. It's tougher at the start if you've got no money. Perversely, the longer you go on, the less you need money, which is really not very helpful to people who are starting with no money, is it?
Yeah.
But if you've got time, you can still exchange some of that time for money, find people to partner with, and all the rest of it. But you also need motivation, you know, and it's those three things. When you've got the confluence of those three areas, I look at that as, I call that the danger zone. And I mean that in two possible ways. Number one, you could put yourself in danger because there'll be lots of people trying to sell lots of things to you that are quite high ticket items, right? Yeah. But two, you can also be quite dangerous because if you've got time, money, and motivation, you can do quite a lot of damage in this space in a relatively short space of time. But similarly, as you mentioned at the end of your question, if you don't manage the risks correctly, you can lose money. People don't realise people lose money in property transactions all the time, all the time. And it just doesn't get spoken about, and it needs to be spoken about. And I think if you can learn from other people's mistakes, that's ideal, which is what I've tried over the years to do, presentations about things that have gone wrong, so that people can see, A, it didn't finish me off, B, how did I deal with it when the chips were down, and maybe there's something to take away from that, and C, you don't win them all. Anyone who's done hundreds of transactions who says they've won on every single one is very likely a liar, Steve, at the end of the day.
It's so true. You've covered so many areas and so many points there. I've spent a lot of time, certainly at the start, getting educated, going to various training companies, various seminars, events, networking groups, and I've been round to various parties. Some good, some very bad, some kind of middle of the road, and they give you the information you need. Educate by reading books, podcasts, as you say, YouTube videos, and all the like. But actually the experience of just going out there and doing something and managing and being self-aware of how you get through it is the best educator. I remember going to see Sir Doug Ellis, and he was probably about 94, 95 when I went to see him, an audience with Doug Ellis. And bless him, he kept having to ask the person who was asking the questions what the question was again, so he could answer it. But he said something, an apple well bought is twice sold. I'm not sure whether that is the correct quotation, but it's something along the lines. And being an ex-qualified buyer myself, I'm very risk averse. Buying that first property, I just got myself into I suppose a zone to say, if I buy it well, then I'm halfway there. If the numbers work, then I'm almost there. Everything else, as long as it's planned and prepped and I've done what I think I need to do, if it goes horribly wrong, it's a lesson and you pay for the education on the parts that you perhaps didn't do. But if you bought well, you're heightening the risk of it being okay.
Yeah, I like the analogy a lot. There's a few things I'd probably like to say about that. I think one, property's full of cliches, as I'm sure your listeners will appreciate, and I know you will appreciate. But one of the ones that really works out is, don't wait to buy property and wait. Mm-hmm. And that is, again, another bit of a Warren Buffettism. Sometimes the skill is sitting on your hands and not buying and selling and buying and selling mm-hmm. and buying and selling. You can trade properties just like you can trade used cars or apples. In the mm-hmm. in the Deadly Dog example, it could be apples, but mm-hmm. It's a very high ticket industry, and there's a lot of frictional costs with buying and selling property. So that's where you want to get it right. And another cliche that I can somewhat identify with is you make your money on the way in, because it's a pretty good one to remember in that it reminds you to buy well. A lot of people think, right, if I could probably the most common example that I've seen over the years, I've got 100K saved up. If I could make £1,000 a month on that 100K, then I'd be happy. Now, some of the problems that I see is people put that money into, it's usually an HMO. And then when they've done that, they get in their £1,000 a month, but they don't really think about the fact that they might have put £300,000 total, including the mortgage and everything else, into that project. But it's only worth £250,000. Mm. So your first 50 months' money, and you're going to pay tax on that as well, remember? Yeah. But your first 50 months are only going in to pay you back for what you've done. So that would be an example of where people didn't buy well, in my view, and they got sort of tunnel vision on cash flow. So you've got to think about what you want why you want to do it. Do you want to protect wealth? Do you want to create wealth? Do you want to protect income?
Yeah.
Do you want to create income? Is it about, you mentioned legacy earlier on? That's a really good point. You know, what are your drivers? If you don't know what your drivers are, then when the chips are down, you'll probably struggle a bit as well. So that's another important factor, I think.
Yeah, it's knowing what you're going in for. I was always going into property for the long-term process.
Yeah.
It was never to buy and sell again, because if I'm honest, I couldn't be bothered with the hassle of buying something, refurbing it, trying to get my money out, then having all the costs to get rid of it. You're only ever going to lose
unless you love it. It's not a good way to make your money, in my opinion. You know, it's my idea of a nightmare. That is,
Well, that's it. It's too much. I'd rather buy well, refurb it, get as much money back out as possible to fund the next purchase, and keep moving that wheel to keep going. And as long as I'm making a tidy profit on the rental income, and I can limit or reduce the amount of voids and keep it as a long-term let, in 20, 30 years' time, when I get to the retirement point and my kids are grown up and decide what they want to do, the wealth has continued to grow. And I mean, I see people with stories where they're going to flip this and flip that. I appreciate that it's got a space in the property arena, but flipping gives me nightmares. Go on.
I was going to say, I like to make a distinction really between an investment business and a trading business here, because you know, they are two completely different beasts. And what you're describing is an investment business, and I think it's what most people want. A trading business, like I said earlier, it could be cars, it could be apples, it could be houses, but it comes with overheads, it comes with cycles. You know, even if there's no one who sits out there, whether they've got an estate agency or whether they've got a house renovation company or whatever they've got, the stock doesn't come along in a straight line in an orderly fashion, you know. But it's the same as recruitment. It's the same as any industry. There's quiet times of the year. There's really busy times of the year. You know, when we get to the bottom end of December, the retailers are having a great time and everyone else is struggling to get much work done, really. You know, there's reasons for that. It's seasonality. And it also introduces a lot of, and this is when you come back to risk management, it introduces a lot of variance. You know, there'll be people who bought property and sold it over the course of the last couple of years, and the market will have carried them forward so far. If you don't appreciate that and you don't give the market the credit it deserves, then when it turns, so London in the middle of the last decade would be a great example of this. You know, everyone was a developer and they were all making money, but the reality was 3/4 of those people could have bought what they bought, locked the door, come back in 9 months' time, sold it and made a massive profit and put no effort into it because the market was carrying them. And then in 2015, 2016, when it started to stutter, suddenly most of them are going broke or selling stuff cheap or whatever else. And the people who've been doing it for years, who are fairly sanguine and also good with their risk management, you know, then they were okay. But everybody else is just left sort of going, who saw that coming? Well, a few people did, if I'm honest with you. Yeah.
And that comes down to education and perhaps spending your time with the right people that have either been there, understand it, or know how to manage it better.
Yeah, I think you raise a really good point around that as well, because for me, and this goes for, you know, you mentioned my Dean's List achievements earlier. I was very grateful for that. But my MBA, one of the things that I learned when I did that was the education was absolute quality. They had practitioners in their field who'd done 25 years in corporate and then were off then teaching people because they made their money, they were happy. They liked the idea of being a professor in a business school. They were absolutely fabulous. I learned so much from them, right? But I also learned that was about 1/3 of the value of that degree, realistically. The next third was the network, was the people that were around you. So you had what they called exec MBAs. So they were in executive positions, you know, chief financial officers, chief execs, all sorts of people who would come and do a week every 8 weeks at the business school. So they spent 7 weeks in their job, 1 week at the business school, and you would do a module with them. And that was incredible experience for you. And of course, the business school is super well connected in a networking from a networking perspective as well. And then the other third was soft skills. So that was because there was a lot of emphasis put on that in terms of influencing, in terms of negotiation, in terms of, you mentioned self-awareness earlier, and that's a massive one. And those two other parts were equally as valuable. And that's something that sometimes people say to me, oh, I bought this property education. We usually have these conversations after people have spent like 20 grand on a course, unfortunately. Yeah. But they come to me and say, yeah, I spent 20 grand on that. I didn't get that much out of it, or I'm involved in it at the moment. And I say, well, just before you beat yourself up too badly, just remember to make the most of the network that it's put you in, because it will be a strong network. Yeah. And make sure you make the most of furthering your soft skill weaknesses. And then, you know, the educational part, you can pick that up over the course of, you know, you'll have all your resources, pick that up over time, but don't give up, because you haven't wasted your money, but you have got to work out how to utilize all of those tools at your disposal. And you've got to, networking is about giving before you ask, isn't it, at the end of the day? And that's what, you know, it goes back to the story you were telling at the very beginning, really. Yeah,
I think my biggest lesson, I've been at 3 or 4 day events where the events are actually free, but there's lots of upselling. They're free to a degree, but they're trying to sell you a lot afterwards. And they're very good in terms of the people in that room. The people you leave after the 3 or 4 days are actually probably the best people you find, because you either find people in similar boats or people that are at the opposite end to where you are. I've got lots of time. They've got lots of money. We both need the education, but actually the partnership is made to kind of build something. And as long as you've got everything, all the other elements in and around you, the potential is there. It's just, you've got to put the foot forward to say, this is where I am and this is what I need.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also think if you can identify people who've got similar values to yourself, that's probably the key part that might be added there, I think. Because I think you want to work with people who have different skill sets or are in different situations. People who are going to challenge each other, that's valuable. But I think you need to have similar values, you know, because you will come up against tough decisions, commercial decisions. Things will happen. Not everything will go plain sailingly. And you might have a business partner, or you might have met someone who would handle a situation completely differently to you. And those are things that, in my experience, tend to sort of tear partnerships apart, really. So if you can try and get that right on the way in, and it's not easy, but if you can, then I think you can do a lot with. And it's the same goes, really. I think when you recruit people, I suppose certainly when I've recruited people, I've thought along the lines of, right, what's their attitude like? What's their values like? Are they going to turn up? Are they going to steal from me? I suppose these are the sort of basic. The rest of it we can work on. If we're not working on the rest of it, I'm not training it properly, or they're not getting the right amount of training. So that needs fixing. You know, if you can start with that base, it's served me well over time.
Okay. So in terms of your journey, and the fact is that within any journey, you're going to have things that go wrong, or things that don't go in the way that you thought they would. What would you say has perhaps been a turning point in your journey where something has failed, or not gone the way you thought it would?
Sorry, Steve. I think I've turned off my Wi-Fi because I think the Wi-Fi wasn't working. So I'm on 5G now, so I should be all right.
Where are we? So we're probably about 30 odd minutes in, aren't we? We can cut this and start again. So I'll ask the question again.
Okay.
So in terms of your journey, there will be situations or scenarios that have occurred that have perhaps happened and they haven't gone in the direction you thought they would. Perhaps they've catastrophically failed, which is generally our biggest learning points. What would you say has perhaps been a single turning point, or something that's happened that has made you either go in a different direction or perhaps have your biggest lesson?
I don't think my biggest lesson has necessarily been from catastrophe. It probably would be from underachievement in many ways, or one sort of key change, I'd say the two really key things that have happened to me are, number one, getting in the right group of people, that private networking group I was talking about earlier. That was absolutely key. And the other one was, I think, looking back on it, I had a fear of using fast finance or bridging finance. And I just thought it can't possibly be worthwhile. The interest rates are too high. It's just too scary to do it. And of course, the time that I've been doing this, so bear in mind, I started taking it seriously in 2011. A bridging loan in 2011 and a bridging loan in 2022 look like two completely different things because of the interest rates and because of the competition in the market and everything else. So that really, for me, unlocked the ability to stretch my equity, getting over. Well, for me, taking that first step into bridging loans was a bit like what we were talking about earlier and people's first step into property. I'd taken the one step. But because I'm primarily quite risk averse as well, I didn't want to take that second step. Mm-hmm. And I sought advice from 6-7 people, and they were really helpful with, it was just really getting their take on it. How did people I knew that were using bridging, and how did they think about it? I didn't ask them sort of how to get off the ledge, if you like. I just asked them, how do they see it? How do they justify it? How does it work with their business model? And I got some really good stuff from that. I mean, the catastrophes, if you like, I've managed to largely get away with because of, going back to what you said earlier, because of buying well. Mm-hmm. So the catastrophes for me that would be much more on the side of the time and the effort and the headache than they are financially happening. I mean, I've lost money. I've lost money on deals, but where I've lost money quite quickly, I've mm-hmm. cut my losses quite early. Mm-hmm. And I think the most I've lost on a property deal is about 25 grand. So it's not like I've never lost any money.
Yeah.
It hurt, you know, and it was only a couple of years ago. It wasn't like that happened early on. So it was still a good reminder that you can't just do anything you want to do. Or someone framed it to me very nicely once. They said, look, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Yeah. And I've remembered those words because I do sometimes, I get a lot of things come across my desk and I'm as guilty as the next person of shiny penny syndrome. Yeah. And sometimes I need to sit back and go, no. You're defined more by what you say no to. I'm sure I'm stealing that quote from someone, but I can't remember who
I think it's Buffett again.
It probably wouldn't surprise me.
You've got to learn to be able to say no to opportunity. Yeah. I think it's something Yeah.
I absolutely agree with that.
I know, having known you for a few years, you are very much about the numbers. You are economics through and through. Some of the articles and posts that you put out are very economically led, and I do love that. I love reading your posts because it engages a part of my brain that perhaps doesn't get used as often as it perhaps should do, and I love all of that because I equally know that you will stack the numbers and you will manage your purchases in a kind of proper understanding of the elements and the risk, and it's important. And I think far too many people that perhaps get into property rush past that at the excitement of, oh, I'm going to have a property and don't always necessarily look at all the risks and the what if scenarios.
That's right. And that's why, you know, some years ago one day I'm going to write a book. I'm going to follow in your footsteps, Steve. But
yeah, you've got
one day I'm going to write at least one book. And the first one's going to have to be about my 4 pillars of investment because that's the thing that I've put together over the course of what I've been doing, where, you know, the first one is really about your deal pipeline and where do you find your property deals from, what's bringing them to you, what makes them good. And the second one's about finance and really remaining financially attractive to lenders, whether they be high street banks, specialist lenders, whether they be private lenders, because you're going to need money. Mm-hmm. And so if you're not using debt, then you must be getting a lot of money from somewhere else and just ploughing it into property. And that's fine if you've got a fantastic business on the one side making millions of pounds a year, you can afford to do that, you know. But still, I've lost count of the number of people I've come across who, because their financial structure, I mean, we've been in an environment now for 10 plus years where the base rate has been very, very low, below 1%, you know, and now we're in an environment where inflation is high, you know, it's above 3%, above 4%. And if you're not borrowing money in that environment, when inflation is more than the cost of debt, you know, you realise in real terms, that means they are paying you to borrow money. You know, so you have to use that And like on the other side of that, if you're saving money and maybe you're in your elder years and it's in a building society, you're losing money every year. And effectively, that wealth transfer is going on from the extra risk-averse older generation to the business owners who are using debt quite strategically. Yeah. And that's a key part of the, remain financially attractive, be financially savvy. Lenders are going to want to talk to you. When you borrow millions of pounds from banks, they want to interview you. They want to talk to you. They want to know you know what you're talking about. So reading the old Sunday supplement that I knock out on the Facebook page, on the Partners in Property Facebook page on Sunday, is a good way to stay savvy. And it drives me to do the research and look into the things that if I didn't write that, I probably wouldn't do it every week. I do have a genuine interest, but it keeps me accountable to do the work. So, because now I know there's quite a lot of intelligent people reading it, and if I write a load of rubbish, then I'm going to get held to account for that as well. So it's a symbiotic thing, really, and that's why I enjoy doing it.
Yeah, but I mean, all credit to you as well, because I think by very nature, a lot of us don't necessarily educate ourselves or don't spend our time in the areas that we should do, because there is so much out there. There's so much things that can distract us or take us down different paths, and the ability to understand actually where we can be highly effective and strategic. I don't think a lot of us spend enough time in those areas.
Yeah, I've certainly suffered from that in the past, where I've had things that operationally are quite successful, but I haven't taken that time out to step away from the screen or step away from whatever and actually think about the longer term. I spent a lot of time working in environments that were very dynamic, lots and lots of change management to consider. Never thought they would last particularly long, but had I taken half a day here and there to go, or a day here and there to go and do some reflection and some strategic planning, I'd have been so much better off than I am now in many ways, but that's just, life can be a bit like that, can't it? Not just business, life is like that.
You get lost in the momentum and the motion of just doing your daily duties, whatever they might be. And quite often we don't spend the time to reflect and look back at where we are and where we're heading. Okay, I mean, so along similar sorts of lines, in terms of perhaps mentors, coaches, people you have around you that you feel have truly inspired you or influenced your path in any ways, who would you say those people are? These can be literary, they could be people you actually have around you, they could be family members, whatever it might be. Who is it that kind of moves you?
Well, I think if you go for the famous inspirational ones, then obviously we've mentioned Buffett half a dozen times already. So I've got to bring him back into the equation, because I think what I admire about him from a technical perspective is, again, he's a very good manager of risk. And there are anything can happen in this world. People say you make your own luck, and I don't really agree with that. But what I do agree with is, if you can avoid bad luck, then you make your own luck. That's how I see it, really. And his mantras, his mindset, everything that he's done, he's taken very small risks, really, and made huge gains. But also, I admire that he does what he loves, and he still does it when he's 90 years old. He loves it. At the more tangible people I actually get to speak to and personal level, I work closely with Rod Turner these days, who has done a lot in property and a lot more development or big developments that he's sold off, certainly way more than I've done. And he's great because he keeps me sharp, he keeps me accountable. I get enthusiastic, I get energy from talking to him and working with him. And we look at the world in quite different ways sometimes. And again, that's really powerful, because it gives us two sides of the same coin. And similarly, Ross Harper is someone I'd pick out from the property space as well, because Ross has done so many deals, so generous with his time, and he's done some incredible things outside of property now as well. Just brilliant with people, brilliant with business ideas, terrible with detail. Strategically amazing, the best problem solver I've ever met by a factor of 1,000. But doesn't, until about 6 months ago, I don't think he had a laptop. It's incredible. Incredible. But what's he good at? Getting people in the right place to help him do that stuff, so that he can ensure businesses run smoothly. And his eye for talent and people who he can work with, people who he can trust, comes back to some of the stuff we were saying earlier, is as good as anyone's that I've ever seen. And he's the kind of person who has 1,000 ideas before breakfast, but he knows how to pick up the one or two that have actually got some legs and some mileage. And he would tell you himself, he's not everything he's ever touched has turned to gold, but it's how you deal in the negative times and the bad situations, and also how quickly sometimes you extricate yourself away from something that's not going very well, or you're not enjoying, or it's not adding any value to your life. You know, and that, I think that a lot of people could use that same sort of mindset to say, look, to a large extent, if you can avoid bad luck, you can go out and make your own luck and do what you want. It's not going to be easy, because if it was easy, everybody would do it, but you can do it.
Yeah, 100%. I think back to my FX and commodity training and trading days, of which I dip in and out these days. It tends to be more long-term trades than it ever is about day trading. But it's about having that, I suppose, that long-term outlook. You cut your losers fast and you let your winners run.
Exactly.
And if you approach things in that way, you eliminate risk along the process, don't you?
So any good trader would tell you that, Steve. Absolutely agree with that.
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of leaving our listeners with a single piece of advice, what would you put to them, having gone through a whole plethora of detail and discussion?
I think the one piece of advice I've got for people is do what makes you happy.
Yeah.
I could, because you're only here once, and ultimately some people are lucky that they're made happy by business. Some people are very unhappy because they get obsessed and they can't do anything else other than work. So that balance has to be there. So I think that's the one word I consider to be the most important these days, is balance. Not just work-life balance, but, you know, balance of as much as you can in your life. If that's your goal, you'll be happy.
Yeah, I love that. Okay. And if there's people listening today and they want to get in touch with you, they want to find out a little bit more about Partners in Property, property education, or coming in and having a chat with you and some of the people you've mentioned, where do they need to go? What do they need to do?
Yeah, so the Partners in Property Facebook page has the Sunday supplement on that we've referred to earlier, or they can look me up on LinkedIn, Adam G. Lawrence. So you can always, I think I'm the only Adam G. Lawrence that's on there. They can do what you did, Steve, and send me a message. Check out my profile. I think I'm up to the Facebook friend limit these days, so it's probably not the best way to get in touch with me. But we've got a great website, partners-property.com. And we do a £10 ticket for anybody who wants to try out their first meeting as well. It's much more than a meeting, but it's out there. We don't do contracts, and we don't do run into the back of the room, and we don't do all that stuff we've already said. So it's more for me about the time that people invest to come along than the cost of it, because the cost of it is buttons, really, at the end of the day. But it's about the time and putting in all of that. So I hope to get a few messages from a few listeners. I'll be glad to engage in some conversation with them.
Yeah, 100%. And I can vouch for the meetings. I've attended a few, not as many as I should do and need to, and I certainly need to get back into it. But if anyone,
you have to work on your accountability, Steve. That's what it is.
100%. Yeah, and I need that. And I think if there's anyone listening that wants to get into property and need to start in a good place, then certainly Partners in Property for me is a good place to start. So a massive thank you. I really appreciate you spending some time with me.
My pleasure, Steve. Thanks again.
Thanks, Adam.